Well, hello and welcome to The Late Show. No Howard tonight, it's me, my name's Gordon, and hopefully you're going to stay with us for the next hour as we meet and talk together. News items, that's what it's all about, and one particular news item in particular we want to concentrate on. But first of all, let me introduce to you my guest in the studio with me, the person who's going to keep the talk going, Tim Vince. Tim, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Gordon. Wonderful.
And you're busy. You seem to be flying around the country at this moment
doing
of time.
quite a lot of travelling, mainly to do with home schools and Christian schools, but other little hats that I put on.
That's right.
Keeps me busy.
You're going up to someone called Moggahanger tomorrow, is it?
I am. We have a new vicar at Moggahanger, a parish church, so I'm going to be involved with the service of welcoming her. But Moggahanger has a wonderful heritage, so I'm pleased to still be involved there.
Good, and obviously you're here because tomorrow the Bible study team are going to be coming, and you're going to be sharing and talking and preparing some more of the Bible studies.
Yeah, we do batches every month or so just to keep them ready to broadcast.
Well, we know that lots of folks appreciate your Bible studies that you and Derek and John are doing now. So great, thank you so much for doing them. And
it is probably the single most privileged thing that I've done in my life for nearly, since 2004.
Yeah.
Quite a long time.
That's quite some time.
Yeah.
Well, we're delighted to have you, and tonight we're not talking about Bible study, although both of us have got our Bibles here, and I think that as we go along this evening you're going to be raising questions, and we are live, which means that we'd love to hear from you live at revelationtv.com, and the SMS number is there as well, so you can come straight through to us here in the studio and send in your thoughts and your messages. We want to talk tonight about Brexit. Now you may say, here we are on a pleasant January evening, why are we talking about Brexit? Well, it was back in 2016 that a vote was taken on the subject. And then at the end of 2019, we left the EU, although it took a whole year, didn't it, for it all to be worked out and happened, which means that just over a year ago, we left the European Union completely, totally. And our question to you tonight is, do you think it's a good thing? Have you seen any difference? Would you, if you had a vote again, still make the same decision? And if you've changed your mind, what are the reasons that have caused you to change your mind? Or if you still think it's the right thing that we should have done, and you're one of those 52% of the population who voted to come out, then what encouraged you at that time, and what benefits have you received? So we'd love to hear from you. I suspect there's going to be all sorts of views coming through to us tonight, and we'd be delighted to hear from you what you've got to say. And if I don't know the answers, then at least Tim's here, and Tim will be able, from his mine of information, to be able to share with us. And if neither of us know the answer, we'll throw it back to the viewers.
Right, exactly.
That's the way to do it, isn't it?
Just fall silent, because that's what we do on Rev TV, isn't it? When we don't have anything to say, we
go silent for quite a while.
5 minutes.
And because we announced this morning on our mornings that we were going to talk about Brexit tonight, and we invited your views, some people have already written in and put their views to us. And so I've got one here from Norma and Peter, and you're up there in Lytham St Anne's in Lancashire, and you write and say, hi Gordon and Tim, we'll be watching, cannot wait to hear and see you two cool cats. That's you and me.
Really?
That's
That's
quite
my kids don't call me that.
Not quite sure, no, where that comes from. Anyway, re the EU, Brexit, I'm delighted. We voted to leave, and that's in big capital letters. With all my heart, I prayerfully felt that peace from God when I sought his counsel. He does not change. It is early days. COVID has arrived on the scene, causing disruption to all. UK appears to have handled the pandemic better than other European countries. We all have the freedom now to choose who we trade with. Blessings in Yeshua, Norma and Peter. Well, that's what they think. You may have some similar views, or you may have entirely the opposite view. Please do write and share with us. And let me just read one other one. And that's from Christopher, and he says, good evening, Gordon and Tim. Well, in a sense, though we have left Brexit, we have never allowed to let go of the Brexit leaders' reins. Also, it seems to me after 12 months or more that Boris's restrictions and all that goes with it are now becoming like threats more than looking after our best interests. Is that a fair comment, do you think?
Yeah, it's a very complicated business, running a country in a world that seems very interconnected economically. But Boris has tried to sort of, as it were, hunt with the hounds and run with the fox. But that's been his career throughout. And it wasn't foregone conclusion that he would even head up the Brexit campaign. So yeah, one lesson is you can't pin your hopes on what politicians promise.
Yeah, I mean, of course, in 2016, David Cameron was the Prime Minister, wasn't
Yes.
he? And the pundits were saying at the time that he put the vote because he felt sure that he was going to win.
Correct, but equally, David Cameron came in as Tory party leader on a very Eurosceptic ticket, and then he tacked in another direction. Boris was, in my view, on the right side of the arguments during Brexit, but Boris isn't sovereign. I don't know whether people realise that. God's sovereign, and leaders, however high or bright their star is, they don't last. And the COVID thing is extremely difficult to manage, and it does show us, with all of us, when crisis comes, the true Boris stand up? And it does look as though it's a different type of Boris that has emerged.
And when David Cameron stood down, he resigned when he lost the vote. Of course, Boris wasn't the one who was elected at that particular time, was he?
No, and Michael Gove came out very strongly against Boris, that he was irresponsible and he wasn't really committed and things like that. So he wasn't popular in the party, but he does have a knack to, in terms of the mayoral elections and the general election, of winning elections. So I wouldn't write him off too quickly.
Okay, well, we don't want to talk just about politics tonight and about personalities. We want to talk much more about what were the real issues. I mean, here at Revelation TV, we as a leadership came out and we said we believe that it's right that the country should leave the European Union, and we put forward spiritual reasons. I remember we wrote a paper and we sent it out to all our viewers and we said, look, these are the reasons. And it's quite interesting because sometime after the election, we received an email from a department of Ofcom to say that we'd broken the rules concerning the referendum election because we'd been partisan in one view or another.
Yeah.
And we were able to argue on two fronts. One is that we showed that although we'd come out as a leadership, we'd also give an opportunity for those who are of a different viewpoint to express their view. Yeah. And you might remember people like Ian Bell.
Yeah. Did a whole programme on it, which Ian, presents his case very strongly.
He did, and I think the other reason was we put forward the spiritual reasons, so it was in keeping with what we as a TV station were saying at that particular time. So we hope tonight that we're going to develop and get down into the spiritual reasons for Brexit as well, and talk about them. But let's start with you, Tim, because you felt it right at that particular time to give up what is your very
potentially yes
well I was going to say your important time and the way that you spend your time in order to be a candidate.
That's right.
And to stand for the Brexit party, didn't you?
Yeah.
Whatever caused you to do that?
Well, life doesn't always, as you know, Gordon, it doesn't go all in a straight line, and certainly it hasn't in my life, and so you make yourself available. And I met someone who was quite high up in UKIP who said that I should apply, and so the application was like, I knew very well what some would call skeletons in the cupboard. My views have been very clearly spoken over Rev TV and over the internet. So it was a kind of fleece that I laid out, and it wasn't because I thought that I would be Prime Minister. It was to stand on what I felt was the key issue, and that was the Christian heritage and the identity of our country, and not only of Britain, but of many other countries in Europe, because I felt very strongly it had been airbrushed out during the period of being part of the EU, which wasn't honestly presented to the British people. So I was very much on that side of the argument, and only God knows how that referendum, Cameron was cornered into agreeing to do a referendum, and then hubris, took over. And as you say, he thought he was going to win it, and then it was, I felt, quite a miracle that, what was a kind of minority group within the Conservative Party and not taken seriously in the establishment, the mainstream media, that somehow, with someone like Nigel Farage at the front as a spokesperson, no one could quite believe that nearly 52% were voted on a very large turnout.
But the majority of people, when they stand for a political party, normally they're questioned very closely about their beliefs and where they stand.
That's true.
I find it, you won't have fudged the answers, you'll have given straight answers. So,
so the first thing is there are about 600 candidates, so it was unusual to be asked, and I just happened to have met some people at the higher ends of the party, and so I didn't solicit an opportunity to appear, but I thought the Sunday, there were a few BBC programmes, but the Sunday Politics, I was invited to do it, so I skipped church and went up to the studios. I didn't know what to expect, except that they'd given me 4 pages of their notes, briefing notes for the programme, which were all on education, because I've been the chair of governors of a school that's involved in special needs. I have been involved in education, and I thought, well, this is their theme, is education. So, but they sprung, I just can't believe the BBC would be so duplicitous, but they sprung a completely different agenda just as I arrived at the studios, and that's what I had to face.
Well, I try to be quite nice as an interviewer and be polite and give people time to answer. But this particular interview that you took place at the BBC with... Steamrollered. I was steamrollered. Turned out to be a real humdinger. We've got an excerpt of it tonight, just to give you a taster of what it was like to be a candidate at that particular time, back in 2016, when the referendum debate was at its height and the country was ablaze with, are you for, are you against, are you going to vote yes, are you going to vote no? And here's Tim being interviewed on that BBC programme.
Lots more to hear from you as we travel around the patch in the next few weeks. But joining us in the studio this morning are the Labour MP for Canterbury, Rosie Duffield, Hannah Perkin, the Lib Dem candidate for Faversham and Mid-Kent, Maria Caulfield is the Conservative MP for Lewis, and Tim Vince is the Brexit Party candidate for South Thanet. Welcome to all of you, and we'll try and hear as much as we can from you on our subjects of the day. Tim, our audience may not recognise you, but some people will. You have been a regular TV presenter on the evangelical Christian channel Revelation TV. Now, look, doing my homework, I've gone back and looked at the things you've said, particularly about the EU as a Brexit Party candidate.
You don't have to look too far.
No, you don't. Yeah, you don't. There's lots of videos and lots of articles. Pretty much everything you've expressed until recently about the EU is expressed in spiritual terms, along with your views on other political issues like sex education and equal marriage. Since you became a candidate in the middle of August, that appears to have changed. Why?
Not at all. You haven't been doing that much research. You've just looked at the front of the internet. The founding myth of the EU is actually of the exploitation of women. You have the statue of Zeus with Europa riding, and it's based on deception, abduction and rape. People don't know that because they want to talk about money and other things. So basically I've been talking about the identity of the EU compared to the 1,000 years of heritage that we have in the UK that goes back to Alfred the Great, the ups and downs of that heritage, but we now have a free democracy where people have a choice, and my concern is that the EU is leading us to an empire. They're quite open. The Lib Dem conference, Guy Verhofstadt saying we need an empire to counter the others, and that is basically totalitarian, which takes away the choice of the democratic elector.
Let's look at some of your statements about the EU then. There's a video of you speaking to Christian followers at the Revelation International Centre in 2018, where you describe the EU as wicked. And you claim the EU was created in a temple, which isn't true. You talk about treaties and
I said it was signed there. And by the way,
let me finish, Tim. Let me finish. I'm going to finish the question. I am going to finish.
I know you are. I know.
Thank you. So I'm going to keep talking because you need to listen to the questions in a political interview. Thank you. You claim the EU was created in a temple that you equate with Satanism. You bring in allusions to thunderbolts, swastikas, and Nazi Germany. Your claims about where these EU treaties were signed is untrue. The Treaty of Rome, you claim, was signed in the Temple of Zeus. It wasn't. It was signed on the Constantine Hill. The Treaty of Lisbon, you claim, was signed in the same temple.
Could you allow me to speak?
Yes,
because you're now telling me what I'm saying, and I'm not allowed to
answer
it.
What I'd like to know is, why do you make...
No, it was actually the Temple of Jupiter.
I haven't asked the question yet,
okay,
so hold on just one more moment. You make all of these claims. I want to know if you're going to bring these claims into the general election debate in South Thanet.
Well, people can ask me, and you're choosing to focus on this, but the EU was signed, the Treaty of Lisbon. The Treaty of
Lisbon was signed in Lisbon, the clue's in the title.
Right. But it was to replace, which is typical EU, they moved the goalposts. So the EU constitution, which was rejected by France and the Netherlands, was signed in the remains of the Temple of Jupiter, which is Roman for Zeus. And I'm just making the point that do we want our future to be determined by Greek and Roman mythology, which led to dictatorship, or do we want to have some recognition, not only in Britain, by the way, but all the other countries of Europe, they have a strong Judeo-Christian heritage, which was written out of the EU constitution.
Well, that was Tim being interviewed on a BBC programme. That was at the time of the election in 2019, which Boris Johnson then went on to lead the Conservative Party to a big party.
It's virtually impossible. As I say, I was being prepped to speak about something else. To get a word in edgeways if they've decided they want to have a very long question on the subject. But the bottom line is that sort of evolved, and the other guests were ignored for about 10 minutes into a number of Christian issues, which was, I mean, I felt it a privilege actually to have an opportunity, but not. I hope I didn't disgrace, Revelation TV for the 2 mentions that you had on it. But spiritual things are not are mocked in the secular realm, and yet the root for me of the issue was spiritual. So I had expressed my views spiritually, and I was mocked for it. But incidentally, she said that it was the Constantine Hill. And she said, oh, no, you've got it wrong. But actually, I went back afterwards, which you don't have time during the interview, and checked. And it was actually the Capitoline Hill, which was exactly that place where the remains of the temple of Zeus and Jupiter was. And she tripped me up, of course. But you can't get everything right. No. But the bottom line is, for me, there's a lot of ideology which needed to be highlighted, and primarily the origins. No one was talking about where did the whole concept of the EU come from.
Well, I want us to come back to that question in a moment or two. And the whole interview was 22 minutes, I think, long, and presumably it's available on YouTube or somewhere.
Yeah,
is it, for people
they can find it and they can see how it sort of migrated. But in terms of her questioning, but they. The key point was when another candidate then said, oh, it's ludicrous to be mentioning this. Yes, I said it is ludicrous, but they have put the statue of Zeus outside the European Parliament and in the mosaic of the floor of the Parliament. So who's being ludicrous?
Okay, well, Tim and I, there's lots of things that we'd like to talk about, but really we want to encourage you to talk with us, and already some of you have started to write in. So let me just share some of them with you. Hi both, says Dave. We won't notice anything for a few years. It will take time. But who cares? We're no longer, says Dave, under the dictatorship of a Brussels machine. And he says it's nice to see you both, and it was nice to see Lorna and I this morning. So bless you. Thanks so much indeed for that, Dave. Now, Amanda, you've written from Belfast. And you say, I voted for Brexit, and I keep hearing how well Boris did. but he sold us out here in Ulster, and he sold out the English fishermen too. We may come back onto that a bit later in the programme. If you're from Northern Ireland, we'd love to hear your view on what do you really feel on the subject. Please, like Amanda, write in and tell us. And this is from, well, the email address is Star Wars, Star Wonder. Okay. Blessings, Gordon and Lorna and all at, Gordon and Tim and all at Revelation TV. The Book of Daniel, chapter 2, explains the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, the toes of the 10 kingdoms of Europe. Pastor Walter Veith, is that the way to pronounce it? YouTube will go into Bible prophecy detail. Put your seatbelts on. God bless you all in Jesus' name. Well, we said the scriptures will come into it, and we want to talk. If you've got some particular scriptures that you think on this subject, we'd love to hear.
And Arnold Fruchtenbaum is a very interesting book called The Footsteps of the Messiah. If you really want to get into the meat of Bible prophecy, there's a lot in there.
Okay. And Hi Gent says, Dory, always a Brexiteer, as better the devil you know. Okay. Only obstacle is we've now got a one-party state. No opposition, puppets in government being controlled by the global elitist masters. We've got to pray for all the good guys who are setting up their own political parties and urge them to unite. Let me just read one more. And this is from Les, and he says, hello, Gordon and Tim. I would suggest that from a biblical perspective, it must be better to be out of the EU. It had too much control and was undemocratic, never should have joined in the first place, would have prevented a lot of hassle, but bad decisions can have consequences, but better late than never.
Yeah, the point is we didn't join, and this is the root issue. It's when James Goldsmith set up the referendum party, which Nigel Farage was part of in the 90s, and he spent a lot of money. He sent a video to every postcode in the country. His point was that the British people had never been asked. It migrated from this sort of coal and steel pact into the economic community, and oh no, we're not going to have a political union, and it just crept. Oh, we're not going to have a unified currency, and bit by bit, the ratchet went on to Britain without the British people being told the truth. So on that alone, it was great to have a referendum. Okay,
but let's go back, because in your interview with the BBC, the thing that was you were trying to get across was the beginnings of the EU.
That's right.
So what is it about the beginnings of the EU that we as Christians should feel bothered about and concerned about?
It's all part of this dishonesty about the history of Europe. Now, Europe, I said in that clip about the ups and downs. Of course, we've had a lot of decadence in our history, but there's been a constant thread of biblical and Christian influence, and often it's those who were the martyrs, or the John Bunyans who were imprisoned, or the Tyndales martyred, Wycliffe, who was disinterred, as it were, and they desecrated his grave. That's sort of cumulative in our history, completely written out of this conglomerate of the EU. And the same could be said of the German Christian history. And again, of course, there have been religious wars, and the Counter-Reformation and the Reformation, there were wars connected to that as well. But going back to King John, we've had our Magna Carta anniversary, that even the kings are under God. So the King John, you must sign this. You are under the law yourself, because the law comes from God. Now that's a theme throughout our history. The EU is not based on us living under God's law. Now, they may have a shadow of the Christian laws, Judeo-Christian framework of Europe, which they've plagiarized into the EU constitutions, but to have no acknowledgements. I stood up once this was when we were lobbying against the EU constitution in Brussels, and the religious advisor to Barroso, who was the commissioner at the time, was there, basically mocking the Christians who were in the room, saying, oh, I think God can, because there was a concern that there was no mention of God, and, oh, I think God can survive the EU constitution. And a Finnish MP stood up and he said, we're not worried, sir, about God surviving. We're worried about us surviving this constitution. And so on that level, and we know that, through history, Christians have been persecuted. So we should humble ourselves under God's, will and purpose in the nations and, even big entities like the EU. But if we have an opportunity to speak, I think we have a duty to speak, but not to get too contaminated by the sort of party politics.
Okay, but you were talking there about the god of Zeus and the image outside the European Parliament. Where did that come from? How did that come into it?
So there's no doubt. I know you've mentioned that we might have a look at David Hathaway's writings on the subject. There was a book by Adrian Hilton called The Principality and Power of Europe, and Lord Tony Pandy, who was the George Thomas, former Speaker of the House of Commons, he wrote the foreword to that book. So it's in our living memory that there were Christians at the high level in Parliament who were prepared to talk about spiritual issues. It's only in the modern times, Blair, cool Britannia, onwards, that it's, we don't talk God, we don't do God. In the generations previously, Mrs. Thatcher, when she came onto the threshold of Downing Street when she was first elected, quoted the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. It was part of our politics, daily prayers in Parliament. BBC was set up on Christian values. The City of London, Christian values. It's embedded in our history, and I can't even remember what the question was.
My question was the god of Zeus, which you were talking about in the early beginnings of the.
Yes, so I read this book, and then obviously I saw what David Hathaway had to say as well. So what I said at the Rev TV 12 minutes that Si gave me when we had the opening, I just felt there is a clear connection. My understanding of the Bible is that there is a root, there's an origin to goodness and righteousness from God, and there's an origin to man-made empires. They think it's man-made, it's not. There's a root, which is the enemy who wants to usurp God's position. So I'm very skeptical of any entity, whether it's China or the Soviet Union or the EU-SSR, that takes God out of the picture. It doesn't bode well for our children and the next generation.
Okay, it's important that we keep God at the centre of our lives, and we seek to have him at the centre of our community and our country that we live in. Now, we've thrown various names out already tonight. You've mentioned Goldsmith, we've talked about Nigel Farage, we've talked about the different people involved very much in the Brexit debate. Nigel Farage, certainly when it came to the referendum time, was one of those who was really key in terms of moving it along. And around that time, or just after the debate, he came along to the Revelation TV studios, and Howard had an opportunity of talking with him, and we want to share a little bit about how that interview went. So have a listen to this.
If you look at it, that referendum that we had in 2016 was an extraordinary event. It was a referendum, it was a choice that the political establishment never wanted to give to the British people, but in the end Cameron was forced to. I think the truth of it is, I put so much salt on their tails, they were absolutely terrified of me. The only way of getting rid of the threat of this awful Farage and this UKIP party was to say, let's neutralise the issue, we'll give a referendum. And I think Cameron thought that by doing that, he'd get rid of me and the issue would actually die, because only a small minority of people would be stupid enough to think that we could govern our own country and make our own friends in the world. The more people started debating this issue, the more people's eyes were being opened to what the European project really was, and the more it became possible that, horror of horrors, in a referendum we could vote to leave. So I think the level of shock in the UK establishment was absolutely massive. I think it was massive too in the global establishment. There's a fellow sitting in the White House who firmly believes that he would not have been elected as president of the USA if it hadn't been for Brexit. A lot of people that went out and voted for Trump did so because they kind of thought, well, if the Brits can do it, maybe we can do it. I mean, really interesting. But where we are now, We are 2.5 years on from the Brexit vote, and we have a Houses of Parliament who, despite the fact we voted to leave by a very clear margin, despite the fact that a year later, in a general election, both the big parties promised us they would deliver on the result, and despite the fact that 498 MPs voted to trigger Article 50, which made it perfectly clear.
And legal.
Legal in every sense, and 2 years in which to negotiate a settlement or to just leave. And here we are now 60 days away from that date, and they are doing everything they can to stop Brexit, to dilute Brexit, to kick the can down the road, to force a second referendum. And I can't think of any comparison in our democratic history where Parliament is so clearly against the will of the people. It's shocking.
Don't you think the media is very biased to Remain rather than...
I think enormously. I mean, it's...
Well, that's got to have fueled the fire with...
It doesn't help. I mean, there is this constant negative narrative, and if you watch TV debate programmes, you know, you will normally see 4 Remainers against 1 Leaver.
Those who wanted to Remain still said, look, let's just leave and get on with it. That's the way it is.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the Leave vote is now coalescing around the idea of we just go. Whatever terms we can or can't agree, we just go, because that's the only way of honouring the result. Now, Project Fear, of course, is in full cry. I mean, the latest one is they might have to introduce martial law.
That's again...
if we leave with no deal. Well, I'm going to suggest they might have to introduce martial law if we don't leave at all.
The average man in the street wants now a change, a big-time change.
We've got the longest continuous running parliament in the world. We've got something here that was called the mother of parliaments. We were seen to be the nation that developed the whole concept of parliamentary democracy. And yet what's going on now is, you know, governments negotiate and parliaments approve or disapprove. That, for centuries, is how we've conducted ourselves on the world stage. But what's happened in the name of building this post-world order, with the European Union at the very epicenter of it, is they've built a new form of government where the people with the power aren't elected, can't be removed. It's power without any sense of accountability, and it's all backed up by a handful of giant multinational businesses. Always, economics is always used, economic fear is always used to try and get us to give up our liberties, to give up our freedoms, to give up those things that our grandparents and great-grandparents sacrificed so much to defend. And this is absolutely at the heart of what this is all about, you know. And the idea that Mr. Juncker, you know, and a bunch of unelected people in Brussels can design a new flag and say, this is now your identity. I mean, it's just for the birds. It isn't going to happen. It isn't working. And we're seeing this in Italy and France and elsewhere. And this is not some extreme form of xenophobic nationalism, as they paint it out to be.
No.
It is a genuine belief, just as you always put the interests of your own family first before the people next door, you put the interests of your country first, and you work in a spirit of open cooperation with your neighbours.
But this is what has been put forward in the last few weeks, big time in the media, is that the ordinary man in the street, you're going to lose. You're going to lose your jobs. You're financially going to be worse off because of Brexit.
Yes.
Really. What are the facts that you know of, Nigel, like the IMF and everything else, which the big boys at the top know we're heading for a crash anyway, and they would like to palm that off to the Brexiteers?
It would be natural to expect downturns to come. I just worry that the reasons that caused the last crash are actually worse now in terms of debt.
They are.
And they are worse. So we are going to get another shock. And yes, they're going to blame, of course.
And through that blame, will they then ask for another referendum in, say, 2 years' time or 3 years' time, when right in the middle of a downturn?
Well, they might do, but the thing is this. There was a question that I asked during the referendum campaign. I said, if this was a referendum for us to vote to join the EU, would we vote to join it? Of course, no. You actually see the European Union as basically the forerunner of global government.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what these people are pushing for. It's pretty clear who the enemy is, as far as I'm concerned.
And who is that?
Oh, the enemy are these giant multinational businesses who are prepared, in their own short and medium-term financial interests, to basically take down our democratic systems.
A lot of our viewers understand that the world will head towards a one world government and a new world order.
What percentage of the UK actually believe in the United States of Europe, actually believe in this new world order? About 8%.
What about other countries coming out like Italy, Greece? Is this what they're really concerned about, and that it's going to just fall apart?
My view is that Italy and Hungary and the others, they might try for 2 or 3 years to reform this, but in the end they'll reach the same conclusion that I reached. That actually this is unreformable, it's the wrong model, and we need to go back to the kind of thinking that we had back in 1948, well, you know, the Council of Europe, somewhere where sovereign countries can go and sit and meet and talk about mutual issues, cross-border problems. I want to do all of that. I'm not anti-European, I never have been. I love Europe. No, it's a fabulous place. But what I loathe is this attempt in their glass and steel structures in Brussels to try and run all of us.
Where do we go in the future? What would you say to bring some comfort to Brexiteers?
Oh, that we are on the winning side here. History shows that false empires never survive, they never last, and this is a false empire that's been built in Brussels. It's got nothing to do with European cooperation, it's about the accretion of power. Tony Blair gave a very, very telling comment. He said the European project used to be about peace, but it's now about power. I'd say to Brexiteers, I know it's desperately frustrating in the short term to see what's going on. But don't worry, folks, the genie's out of the bottle, we're winning, and if we have to take them on again, we'll take them on again and we'll beat them even more heavily.
Well, that was part of a longer interview that Howard Conda did with Nigel Farage. Around about late 2018, he came to our studios.
So.
And
when the folks who had voted for Brexit felt it was going to be stolen from them, because Theresa May was saying, what was it? No deal is better than a bad deal, and then Brexit means Brexit. I mean, it was just all talk. When she actually had the power, before Gina Miller challenged her power, she had the power to sell us all down the river. So even though people have set up Gina Miller as a kind of hate figure, actually she served us well by making sure that, again, it comes back to King John, that the Prime Minister was subject to Parliament, and then we had the mayhem in like unprecedented mayhem in Parliament with a biased Speaker of the House of Commons.
Of course, at that time. Well, if you just tuned in, we're talking tonight about Brexit. It was just 2 years ago, in the January, that Brexit came into being, that we separated from the European Union. We're asking the question, do you think that there's been a benefit or not a benefit? COVID has gotten all the way in the way, of course, to change things around. But if there was another vote, would you still vote the same way? If so, why? And if not, then tell us your reasons for it. And lots of you have been writing in, so let me just share. I love this one, which I just wanted to say. Somebody's been sending it out to their friends to say, have a look at the Late Show on Revelation Now. Tim Vince is on, who stood as a candidate for UKIP, and I put my 2 pence in. I don't know who you are, but bless you for telling other people.
I'm sure it's more than 2 pence worth.
Really?
Oh,
okay.
Yeah. They've all been great emails.
And here's one which is saying, was it ever mentioned about what the fishing limits we got? And he says Iceland, they fought for years and got a specific mileage 1 years ago. So what's our mileage in area? I don't know. Do you know?
Well, I don't know the absolute detail, but I know that was one of the areas of compromise. And actually, it does. You have to have an element of coexistence when it comes to fishing, and of course, we've had this dispute over the registration of ships, and the French are generally more pushy than we are when it comes to the high seas. And generally, even during the EU times, we had British frigates out there sort of policing the British fishing, but allowing free rein for the others. And we have a similar situation now, sadly, with the migrants, where because we are a soft touch, as it were, and we tend to allow people to take advantage. And we didn't. We were of course, Tony Blair said, "Oh, we need to be in the heart of Europe," and all of that. But at the end of the day, we didn't have the influence that France has. They are really at the heart of Europe.
And they really are pushing. I mean, Macron has got an election to fight.
It's threatening.
But I mean, Lorna and I were going to go, our daughter and family live in France. We were going to go and join them for Christmas. We paid to go in the Eurotunnel, and then suddenly he closed it.
Yeah. And it's a bit arbitrary.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's arbitrary rule that is not really accountable, and we'll see what happens in the French elections. But he's a very smooth operator. Mark Rutte did something similar. He used some expletives towards the Muslims in Holland, and he became immediately popular. And they all know how to play the populist card, and an anti-British card is a very strong one for Macron.
But one of the key cards for the French is this fishing area that's been raised. This is from Stephen in Carrickfergus in Northern Ireland, and you say, Gordon and Tim, Happy New Year to you both. I'm a 64-year-old man. Before my Christian parents passed away, they always told me that if the opportunity ever arose to come out of the EU, to jump at it. So I jumped. We were always the second-class citizens of Europe. Yeah. Now, and remember this is from Carrickfergus in Northern Ireland, now Northern Ireland are second-class citizens of the UK. I'm still glad we left Europe.
Yes.
That's interesting. I mean, that's the second one we've just had from Northern Ireland where people have been expressing.
And it won't go away. And I'm pleased that Liz Truss is sort of holding the line of Lord Frost, and hopefully the key thing is that we're not subject to the rule of the European courts, and that's what Lord Frost was holding on, because then we are sunk on Northern Ireland, and it's a kind of phony argument about a hard border or a soft border. I was there a couple of months ago, and it is an open border, and electronically everything can be monitored. It's all mostly big companies who pay VAT or they pay taxes, and all products are monitored. So it's a bit of a phony argument they're using against us, but it's not phony when the businesses in Northern Ireland are being penalised. Yeah. So I think Boris is going to be in trouble if he concedes on that one.
And the difficulty is the whole power-sharing agreement. There was a piece in the Times yesterday which said Boris Johnson has been told it is inevitable that Northern Ireland's fragile power-sharing government will collapse if he fails to solve the dispute with the EU over the implementation of the border control.
Exactly.
That's the dilemma, isn't it?
And we have a good man, in Geoffrey Donaldson. I watched him for many years as an MP, met him many times because he was one of the few MPs, Christian MPs, who stood up and hosted and accommodated Christian groups who cared about the issues that we all care about. And he's now the first minister of Northern Ireland. And so I hope that, as it were, he will hold the line. Of course, we don't want to go back to, the level of sectarianism and hatred and violence. And there are folks out there who will try to whip it up. But that again is fear-mongering.
But clearly there is a real fear amongst a large proportion of the population in Northern Ireland that Brexit is not working for them.
Definitely. For those that want a united island of Ireland, they're very happy to play this along, and it could, that so many changes in Ireland, Southern Ireland and Northern Ireland, there could be an agenda to try and dissolve what I think it's 100 years old now. The whole setup of Northern Ireland, but that's. The people who want to dissolve things like that want to go back into the history books and see what is the identity, what is the spiritual identity, and start with that rather than the politics or the fear of a return to the days of the IRA, which I don't think they have anything like the capacity. So that's like, again, it's another straw man phantom.
We pray that doesn't happen very much. And whilst we're talking about Brexit tonight and all the issues involved, that's a real area that as Christians we need to be praying into. And there's a strong Christian community in Northern Ireland.
Very strong.
We need to be standing with them at this time in the way that they're feeling. Brian, you've messaged to say, my reason for voting to come out of Europe was in the hope of seeing our laws reinstated to where they used to be under God's standard, i.e. the main three being marriage, abortion and divorce. I was hoping to hear repentance from our government and Anglican church leaders on behalf of our nation for allowing our laws to slip. In these issues so far, I've been disappointed as our country still remains under secular leadership, which is sliding, in Brian's view, more and more into what seems to be a surveillance police state, more in line with fascism or communism. That's a pretty damning statement, isn't it? And the next one from Ian says, how can anyone speak well of Boris Johnson with his lies and his deceits? Where is truth and honesty? That's a big issue for our politicians.
He's a philanderer. He's got the track record, but actually he does, he sort of is saying, look, I'm a sinner, but so are all of you. And he sort of does identify with the voter in a way that some of these sort of hypocritical politicians who project themselves as absolutely whiter than white, they fall apart. But because he's not projecting himself as that, he does resonate. And of course, he just happened to be, he could easily have been on a pro-EU side, but he thought as a politician that it was advantageous. Yeah. He even said it openly, that he had two potential speeches he was going to give, or articles in the Telegraph.
I was driving up the M1 motorway going north last weekend. And as we were driving up, before we got to the M6 turnoff, we went under one of the bridges and a huge sign over the top which says that Boris Johnson tells lies. And sadly that is a reflection of what people think about him. But every politician, all of us to a degree, tell lies. As Christians we seek not to do. But he's been found out, and
this was always his ambition. And if a politician is so driven, they'll do anything to get to the greasy pole, as Disraeli called it, to climb the greasy pole. But the scriptures are very clear that we should be first saying, well, what is honouring to God? God sees all things, so you might be able to hoodwink an electorate, even in a general election. Yeah. But ultimately, these folks, Isaiah 40, God brings the rulers to naught. Cameron was riding so high in 2015, and within just over a year, he was gone. Yeah. And no one foresaw that.
But the scriptures tell us quite clearly we're to pray for our leaders.
Definitely.
And so whatever we think about, whatever leader is in power at a particular time, we're still there to pray for them. Well, as Christians, we put forward the arguments back when the debate took place. I remember we had a number of interviews with people like Peter Horobin, the leader of LL Ministries, and David Hathaway, Eurovision. He came out very strongly. And in fact, he produced a whole load of material and a DVD entitled The Rape of Europe. I just want to give you a little taster, just for about 2 or 3 minutes, of what David had to say at that particular time as to the reasons that he saw that it was right for Britain to separate from the European Union.
So what is behind the creation of a European state? You can look at it from a political or from a social or an economic point of view. There are economic and political reasons for it. But at the same time, don't dismiss the fact that there could actually be a biblical background to this. And it may be that this European Union is a fulfillment of something which was foreseen more than 3,000 years ago in the prophecies of the Bible. I want to investigate this aspect of it and see what the Bible says about the creation of a united Europe. Since the events at the end of the 20th century, which saw the ending of the second great superpower, not just Russia but communism, which dominated 1/3 of the world, we begin to realize that the whole of recent history, certainly the last 4,000 years, has seen a succession of empires and kingdoms, and in more recent times we saw, at the beginning of the 20th century, the rise of the communist empire, which at its peak controlled 1/3 of the world. Then in the middle we saw the gradual collapse of the British Empire, which at one time also controlled 1/3 of the world. Now we are seeing, since the collapse of communism, the absolute dominance of America in world politics and economy, but yet alongside it arising a challenging force, that of the emerging European empire. And I use the word empire here deliberately. What is Europe? Is it simply a social union? Is it an economic or commercial union? Is it a political structure? Or is it becoming a threat to the world? Some would suggest previous empires were. Now let me examine this in a little bit more detail. I want to turn you to what the Bible says. We know from our history, as I have already mentioned, that there have been a succession of world empires. One clear definition of this is certainly found in the Bible. In the book of Daniel, a very strong prophecy, you find that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, translated by Daniel, of an image with a head of gold, chest of silver, thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet a mixture of iron and clay. Daniel was given the translation of that dream. There would be 5 succeeding empires. The head was Nebuchadnezzar himself, and Daniel said clearly that the succeeding empire, the silver, would be the Medes and Persians. The bronze would be the Greeks, the iron, the Romans.
Well, that was just a short excerpt of the things that David Hathaway had to say at that time. And Gordon, you've written in to say David Hathaway said the agreement that was signed for joining the EU was signed in the same seat as Hitler made his intentions. And the building that everyone met was the same design as the Tower of Babel. Also, the statue of the woman on the horse is at Strasbourg. It all stinks of Satan, he says.
Some of these myths are really terrible, and they've made a virtue out of them somehow. And they've put it on their coins, and it's a weird inversion, if you ask me. There are much more wholesome things you can think about in terms of unity.
Okay. Well, we've only got a few minutes left. Let me just try and read some of your emails. Here's Alex in Scotland saying, Tim, it was awful that you were grilled by the BBC in that way. I didn't vote at all, but I was happy that we're not under the grips of the EU. And Anita, you've sent scriptures, Galatians 6:8, whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. And Chinwe says that she was proud of it. I'm proud of you. You were clearly set up to be tripped by the BBC interviewer, but you acquitted yourself in your eyes. Thank God we got out of the BBC. And Mandy in Northern Ireland says, I wish you were Prime Minister, Tim. I don't know whether you'd like the job.
Well, no, but the Yemi's got to be Prime Minister first, apparently. I hear more emails on that.
Okay. And here's... sorry you had to deal with that, Tim. Shocking, says somebody.
It got worse, but we couldn't have the whole programme talking about it.
We couldn't. And Jill says, good programme. The island of Jersey is having difficulty with the French fishermen in our shared waters. Our government has issued 130 licences to them for such a small area of sea. So our fishermen have a great concern for their businesses. This is obviously from Jersey. France is trying to bully our politicians to toe the line to their opinion, even threatening us with sanctions. There's so many issues that we could be talking with. We maybe need to do another programme and carry on talking. But last 30 seconds, anything you'd like to finish with?
Only that we should never sell our birthrights, for a mess of pottage. Or, as Potiphar's wife offered Joseph a political route, but he said, "How can I commit such a sin against God?" And that's our primary concern.
Well, thank you so much for being part of us tonight for The Late Show. Thank you, Tim, for being with me. And trust you have a good night, and we look forward to being with you tomorrow. God bless. Bye-bye.